Thank you so much. Thank you so very much, Larissa and Natalie. Thank you so much. For those of you who are hoping to see a presentation of food prep, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but there's no food prep in store today. Um, I want to explain to you more why we're doing the show and why we're doing a show that is so completely different from any other chef, cooking, prep, whatever you want to call it, show that you've ever seen before. There's nothing like Let's Cook Raw. And the reason is because we don't have an anything goes attitude. We're following specific health guidelines of whole, fresh, ripe, organic plants, low fat, raw, vegan, proper food combining, a lot of things that make our show quite different. So, a couple of nights ago, for Ronnie Smith over at the UK Fruit Festival, I did a presentation talking about 34 different reasons, key step-by-step approach of how to successfully go raw. And we're not really going to do that here. Today, what I'd like to do is give you three very basic pieces of information. I want to talk to you about things that will help you when you interact with others, when you have that self-talk where you're going, I wonder if I should be doing it this way or that way. When you're wondering, why are you even bothering? Over and over, we're going to look at why vegan in the first place and why raw vegan in the second. And why low fat raw vegan? What's the rationale behind this stuff? Why did I bother? I mean, I took a very circuitous, long roundabout, frustration, failure filled approach to go from the standard Western diet that I was raised on to the way that I eat now. And that was easily 17 years worth of experience and experimentation, and basically 17 years worth of failures, and possibly much more than that. But that much was directed. And part of the problem was I had no idea where I was trying to get to. I just didn't know where I was going, where I was going to end up. And so I just knew that I wanted something that would allow me to stay fit, would allow me to stay athletic, would allow me to be satiated all the time, would allow me to overcome any and all sense of cravings, would give me the mental clarity that I knew I was capable of, but just never seemed to be able to put my finger on. Oh, I wanted to stay healthy and I wanted to stay happy about the food I was eating. I mean, I wasn't asking for much. I just wanted everything. And I just kept looking until I stumbled upon low fat raw vegan, basically out of desperation because nothing else worked. So if you're in that boat where you're here because nothing else works and you finally realize that, well, okay. So let's look at some of these things. First of all, why vegan? Vegan nutrition simply doesn't compare to non-vegan nutrition. If we look at the nutrients in plants, we can easily identify some 500,000 different nutrients. That's a lot of different. We don't know what all of them do yet. We don't even know what all of them are yet, but we know they have a chemical marker and we can find them. We just haven't figured out what they do in us, how they interact with other nutrients, what role they play in the symphony that nutrition really is, where there's more than 500,000 players and they're interacting with each other in a way that allows us to be as good as we can possibly be. But it's still a lot of players, 500,000 nutrients. It was enough nutrients to convince me that there was no way that I could teach nutrition based on nutrients, because how in the world do you juggle 500,000 nutrients? I couldn't possibly, knowing full well that every nutrient interacts with at least 8 others on a first line of interaction, and usually at least 64 more on a second line of interaction. I'm going, oh my gosh, how could I possibly do 64 times 500,000? It got so out of control that I go, if I start teaching people nutrition based on nutrients, I'm faking it basically, and there's no way to get it right. I looked at a steak, a bit of milk, cheese, didn't matter. When you look at animal products, they offer us 100 nutrients. And I did the math, 500,000 to 100. You come up with a 5,000 to 1 ratio. So for every nutrient that's in meat, when people say, oh, you got to eat meat, for every nutrient that's in meat, there's 5,000 in plants that aren't in meat. This is huge. This is just, it's inarguable, but even better, of the 100 that are in meat, they're all in plants anyway, except for a few. Those few are manufactured by our own body or manufactured by the microbes that live in our own body, or we get them when we go out into daylight and sunlight. So for instance, vitamin D, manufactured in our own body, coming from the sun. I'm done with that argument already. 5,000 to 1, and people want to tell me, oh, I need the 1, which is already in plants anyway. No, there's just no basis. There's no basis whatsoever. But not only that, in the 100 nutrients that you get in animal product, you also get many things that are unwanted, among them something called anti-nutrients. And anti-nutrients cause you to need excessive quantities, greater than normal quantities, of the nutrients that you would normally need. So for instance, an anti-nutrient for calcium would cause you to need more calcium than usual. And we find those in animal products. So although there's lots of calcium in milk, there's also anti-nutrients for calcium in milk, so that you actually end up with a net result of losing calcium when you consume dairy products. So nutrition was a big reason for me to go vegan, but so was health. When we look at the population as a group, roughly 97 to 98% of Americans, when tested, show signs of heart disease, cardiovascular disease. And yet, heart disease is, I'll say virtually, it's almost unknown in vegan communities. When we say, oh, and 3% of America is vegan, guess which 3% don't have heart disease? Well, this is pretty easy. When we consider, for instance, that cholesterol is known to be a big player in heart disease, and there's cholesterol in animals and there's cholesterol in plants. But the amount of cholesterol in plants is 1/1,000,000th as much as you find in animals. So if you ate 3 meals a year, if you ate 3 meals a day for a year, let's call it 1,000 meals, and then you did that for 1,000 years, which would be a pretty good lifespan, you would consume as much cholesterol in 1,000,000 meals of plants as you get from one meal that consumes animals, 1,000,000 to 1. So most of us have already had our one animal meal, and now we're just, if you're going to add to that load, doing it with plants allows your body to actually process more calcium than you produce, more than you consume, and you can lower your cholesterol levels down to healthy values simply by eating plants. 1,000,000 to 1 is a big deal. But the other part of it is that the nutrients in plants more closely mimic the nutrient requirements that humans have. And so, although we've been sold a bill of goods that more is better, and you can get more of this or you can get more of that if you eat an egg or something, in reality, we know better. And we just stop thinking for a minute. We know when we get blood work done that we don't want to be high or low in our values. We know when we take our temperature that we don't want the temperature to be high or low, that we don't want blood pressure to be high or low, or pulse rate to be above normal or below normal. We know that when we do laboratory values, we want to come inside the parameters that we call within normal limits. We don't want to be high, we don't want to be low. But somehow, even knowing all of that, even knowing that Goldilocks didn't want her porridge too hot or too cold, we still fall for the trap of thinking that more equals better in the world of nutrition, and it simply doesn't. We know it simply doesn't, because if you refine out all the nutrients from sugarcane and end up with just the glucose, or just the sucrose, or just the dextrose, or just any refined sugar, that we have something called empty calories. And although it's more sugar, it's not better for you. Empty calories, whether it's protein, fat, or carbohydrate, isn't better for you any more than empty nutrients, nutrients being devoid of all other nutrients like a vitamin A or a vitamin B, can't possibly be as good for us as when we take in vitamin A or vitamin B or C from the foods we eat. So the nutrient makeup of plants more closely mimics those that of our human requirements, and we don't need more, because if you're getting more of this, you're most likely getting less of something else. And that can't possibly work in terms of the balance that we require for nutrition. The other part of the health aspect of veganism came to light early this year, well, last year now, once again, although it has happened time and time and time. We can name some of the flu that have come upon us in the past. They always come from someplace far away, like the Hong Kong flu, the Russian flu, the Chinese flu. But there's also bird flu and dog flu and swine flu. And this year, nobody's saying for sure whether it was a bat flu or a pangolin flu or whatever it was. But we know that a fantastic number of human diseases come from animals. And when we raise these animals, when we consume these animals, we're not only playing a compromise game with our health, but we're also playing roulette with our health. It's a straightforward Russian roulette. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Almost every plague, almost every illness that we know started out, you can trace it back to raising and consuming animals. Third reason for being vegan is the environment itself. The animal industry pollutes more than any other industry. It uses more water than any other industry. It has a greater global impact on the environment than any other industry. It's so far out in first place that it eclipses, I believe, second, third, and fourth place combined. Whereas the converse, the vegan approach, planting trees to grow fruit, trees sustain and normalize our weather patterns. If we're looking to keep the environment healthy, we need to keep planting trees, not cutting trees in order to raise animals. So the vegan approach, nutrition, health, environment, these are huge reasons to me, and they're big enough that for that alone, when I went vegan, there was no turning back. But I wasn't vegan for very long, although I was a vegetarian for a long time, and I was eating standard Western diet for almost 20 years. I wasn't vegan for very long before raw vegan became so obvious that I just couldn't resist. I couldn't ignore the message. How do I go, I don't want to go raw? I mean, nobody wants to go raw. Nobody wants to eat mono meals. Nobody wants to, start doing push-ups every day, or nobody wants to make the requisite changes that allow us to grow into becoming better people. We resist it. We want our cake and eat it. Oh, who doesn't? I do too, but I also love the security that comes with following the rules. I think that's just a really cool thing, that nature has already set up guidelines for us. And when we look at some of those guidelines, we can again look at 3 reasons why raw. So the first reason I look about raw is, once again, nutrition. And it's not a nutrition night. I'll talk about nutrition in greater length in subsequent lectures, but it's not a nutrition lecture per se. Let's go the other way around and go, here's what happens when we heat food. Out of those 500,000 nutrients that we find in plants, that include the 100 that we find in animals anyway, it just eclipses it by 499,900. There are only a few that are not damaged, deranged, or outright destroyed when subjected to heat. The heat of cooking does so much damage nutritionally that it's actually quite astonishing. It's a tribute to how tough we are that human beings can survive on as much cooked food as they do. They don't thrive, they survive, and they go downhill, and they go downhill generationally. And what's been shown for the last 100+ years by a variety of scientists now is that when we cook our food, we create not only the anti-nutrients that I talked about that make us require more nutrients, but we generate a bunch of other types of anti-nutrition substances, essentially toxic substances to our body. One of these are carcinogens. We know that when we heat food, we create carcinogens. Pretty much everybody knows this, I think, because this information came out in the 50s and possibly even before. And people said, oh, when you barbecue a steak, all that blackening on the steak, that's all carcinogenous. And back in 1917, a doctor by the name of Maillard, a French doctor by the name of Maillard, showed that the browning reactions that happen are carcinogenic. When we brown carbohydrates, and then we found out that later on, when we could understand a little bit more and we understood about how proteins are held together, that when we heat them, we we they come apart, the bonds come apart and then come back together as what are known as cross-linked, enzyme-resistant, toxic proteins to which the body responds as if it's a foreign invader with a flow of white blood cells into the blood to try to fight off the toxic effects of the cooked food, of the heated proteins. So we know about carcinogens. Mutagens are also formed, and mutagens are rather interesting because mutagens are substances that cause cells not to reproduce perfectly. In other words, cells normally produce perfect carbon copies of themselves. And when cells can no longer produce perfect carbon copies of themselves, this is called a mutagenic change. And we know that when you cook food, you create mutagens of all types. Why do we care? Well, we care because we have a common word that we use to describe the effect of mutagens on the human body. And that common word is called aging. So if you want to accelerate the aging process, you eat cooked food. If you want to decelerate the aging process down to its slowest possible normal level, we go raw. To me, carcinogens and mutagens would be enough, but there's also tremerogens, substances that cause you to shake. And we know that when you cook food, we create a wide variety of tremor producing substances. How much of that do you have to eat before you end up with shakes? Well, apparently some people have hit the limit. It certainly can happen in less than a lifetime. But not only tremerogens, but also tumorigens. Tumors are rampant in the human population these days. And we know for a fact that when you cook food, you create a wide variety of tumorigens. Okay, is every cooking process the same? No, they're not all the same in these regards. No, of course not. I mean, the most gentle warming of food, your hand is in the soup until it's warmed. I mean, that's not the same as putting it on a searing hot grill or griddle and leaving it there for 10 minutes. Okay, granted. And when you blacken rice, it's not the same as if you just cook it in a whole lot of water and then pour off the excess water later on. Okay, there's lots of differences, but all heating does the same thing because what we're doing is known as PCH. It's partially combusted hydrocarbons. All foods and all animals, for that matter, including us, are what we call hydrocarbons. Now, in the environmental world, the Environmental Protection Agency controls what comes out of smokestacks and what comes out of the exhaust of your car. And in both instances, what they're looking at are PCH, partially combusted hydrocarbons. And they say, look, when you burn gasoline, which is also a hydrocarbon, that the part that didn't get completely burned to turn your fuel into energy, the part that is coming out your exhaust. And we care about those partially combusted hydrocarbons because they're toxic. We care about what comes out of the smokestacks of the factories because those partially combusted hydrocarbons are toxic. But we don't monitor what comes out of the vent over your kitchen stove because we just haven't started doing that yet. We don't monitor what comes off of your grill because we just haven't started doing that yet. But don't you know, when the first lawsuit comes, there will be more to follow. And I'm not looking forward to that day in any way, but when your next door neighbor sues you because you have a barbecue every night and their baby got cancer because the fumes came over into their yard, and there's going to be a price to pay. And cooking Cooking is on the way out, folks. It's unsustainable. It's We look at certain types of behavior and we go, gosh, that's not socially correct. And I look at people cooking and I go, that's just not socially correct. If if you have to control the noise coming out of your house, you have to control the light coming out of your house, you have to control a lot of things, otherwise you're polluting the environment. Why don't you have to control the smells that come out of your house and go into the next apartment or into the neighbor's yard where other people may not like that smell or may think that it's detrimental to their health? Because understand full well that when you smell something, it's already in your bloodstream. That's how it got to your brain. So we go, oh, I don't eat that stuff from the fast food joint anymore. I just go by and sniff. I just smell it. Well, when you smell it, it's already in your bloodstream. And studies have been done comparing the toxic effects to the lungs of breathing the air in a deep fry establishment compared to smoking cigarettes. And the smokers got off easy. The people working in deep fry establishments that don't smoke have higher cancer rates than smokers. And yet nobody's saying a lot. I am. I'm saying that there's a good reason to be raw because cancer is still scary business. Mutagens, tumorigens, tremorigens, all of these things are caused by PCH, and that's not even the worst of it. The worst of it is what's called it's called teratogens. The worst of it is called teratogens. If you're old enough to remember thalidomide, thalidomide was a teratogen introduced to pregnant moms, and it did what it was supposed to do for the moms, but for their unborn child, it caused their arms and legs not to form. So we have a bunch of babies walking around the planet with feet and hands, but no arms and no legs. It's not a good look. And it was perhaps the worst teratogen ever introduced into the human population so far, although there's people saying 5G might be worse. There's people saying that glyphosate might be worse. And glyphosate is so endemic at this point that we're finding it in mother's milk just because it's in all our food. This is a serious problem. For those of you who don't know glyphosate, think of the product known as Roundup. It's a broadleaf defoliant, Agent Orange. So the soldiers who were exposed to Agent Orange and came home with nerve diseases and other debilitating diseases, degenerative changes that happen in their bodies as being exposed to this stuff. This is the same as glyphosate, and we're putting it on our food. I'm sorry, this is a scary, scary but there's a bunch of teratogens that form. And what is a teratogen? It's something that doesn't necessarily affect your health adversely, but it'll affect your offspring or the next generation or the next generation. It could be 6 generations down the line. We don't even know. But we know the cumulative effect, just like we've seen the cumulative effect of toxins through what's known as the food chain. We're seeing the same thing as we go from generation to generation, passing on teratogenic changes. So for me, I'm eating raw because of nutrition. I'm eating raw because the vibrations that come from whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic plants are so high compared to a bunch of brown jelly on your plate. I mean, the last unrecognizable brown food. Oh, what's this? I mean, it's like the story about the guy, newlywed guy, and his wife said, really, I should tell you, I can only make 2 things. I can only make meatloaf and apple pie. And he looked at her and he said, "Which is this?" Oh, well, I should be able to hear you. That should have been so funny. Okay. So maybe it was the guy cooking. All Maillard reactions are known to cause carcinogens, but they also cause neat flavors to happen. And in the flavor world, more than 75% of all the flavors, all the aromas that you're familiar with, all the aromas used in perfumes, they all rely on this Maillard reaction, which is why if you go to many doctors' offices, you'll see a sign that says, "Please, for the benefit of some of our sensitive patients, don't wear strong perfumes when you come into this office," because they react adversely. The success of the human being, the fact that we're here, is how biology measures the success of every creature. So the dodo couldn't learn to avoid the hunters or the hungry sailors, but the cockroach has figured out how to survive through everything. The dinosaurs couldn't figure it out. Whatever they needed to do, they couldn't do. Saber-toothed tigers, thing of the past. Woolly mammoth. But people have been here for quite a while. We don't even know how long people have been here. Not really exactly. It's hard to know exactly. There's a bunch of predecessors to the current Homo sapiens that were also Homo, by all intents and purposes, people. There's been at least 6 or 8 other species before Homo sapiens that would count as people. And by all accounts, we've been here a few million years. Life on Earth's been around for a long time, and all animal life on Earth eats raw. That's a pretty good model to follow. But even the people ate raw for about 99.9% of the time that we've been walking the Earth. If you asked me to bet my life savings, and I have a 99.9% chance of doubling my money, or I've got a 0.1% chance, I'm going for the 99.9. I don't know about you, but I'm going for the 99.9. 99.9% of the time humans have walked the earth, we ate raw food. That's a pretty good track record of success to duplicate. You go with what works, folks. You do what we already know has worked before. It's very likely going to work again. History supports the consumption of raw food. So it brings us to why low fat. And low fat has, I mean, I could talk about this for a long time. I could write a book. For me, the most critical thing that happens with low fat diet is clarity of mind. As your blood sugar levels optimize and stabilize, the clarity of mind that goes on is, it's hard to describe to somebody who hasn't experienced it. It's hard to convince them what being turned on is about. So I'll go about it the other way. What happened to me? I was trained as a child to have a pretty good vocabulary, and both my mother and father were big on the use of words and learning the proper words to express yourself well. And I'm really thankful for that. But I used to have this thing happen to me all the time. Not if it's ever happened to you. I'd be wanting to tell somebody about something, and I'd get to a point where I wanted to tell them something, and I just couldn't come up. I knew the word, but I just couldn't come up with the word. I couldn't get it out. I could even tell them what the word meant, and eventually they'd give me the word. You ever had that feeling? Just nod if you've had that feeling. You just couldn't. Wasn't that there wasn't recall, it was there somewhere, but you just couldn't quite get it out. That used to happen to me all the time. And the other thing that used to happen to me all the time was that I'd be talking with friends. No big deal, just living room conversation. And as conversations tend to do, we would digress a little bit here, there, or the other place. And we'd digress and we'd digress. And then the next thing you knew, somebody would say, "What was I talking about?" And you'd almost invariably rely on somebody else to remind you what you were talking about. Not if you've had that one happen too, you know, and it's just those two things used to happen to me all the time. And I went raw and that stopped happening like turning on a light switch. It was so sudden, so profound, so noticeable. And I was just going, whoa, it's almost spooky. It was really almost spooky. For me, clarity of mind, I didn't even know why. Now I understand why, because my blood sugar levels became stable and my brain could function instead of always being in a blood sugar emergency. We're seeing that most of the population these days is always in a blood sugar emergency. They're kind of like a clock that has stopped. It's only right twice a day as it goes past and as it goes past again, you know, but all the rest of the time they're in blood sugar emergencies, or they've already become full-blown diabetic and the emergencies have got to the point where they have to medicate themselves. At the same time, the energy that I normally use to digest food, which is roughly, for people on a standard Western diet, about 35% of the energy in food, okay, using the nutritional sense of energy, or from a hygienic standpoint, the fuel that's in food, approximately 35% of the fuel in food gets used to digest and process the food itself. That's a lot of work and very little return on investment. So you put $1 in, you only get 65 cents back. It's not very nice. When we go to raw foods, especially a low-fat, raw vegan diet, which means a fruit-based diet. When we're on a fruit-based diet, fruit is so easy to digest that it almost requires none. Almost none. The water in fruit requires no digestion. The minerals in fruit, no digestion, just absorption. The glucose and fructose, no digestion, just absorption. The fiber in fruit doesn't get digested, just like fiber anywhere else. It passes through. The nutrients in fruit require almost no digestion, so extreme that if you've had a good workout or you've gotten pretty hungry one way or another, you've been out doing a bunch of gardening or something, and then you come inside and you eat a peach, before you finish eating the peach, the nutrients in that peach have already passed through your mouth, esophagus, stomach, into the intestines, into the bloodstream, and you can feel it coursing through your body, the refresh feeling of, wow, the surge of the glucose coming back and the water coming back, and you feel invigorated. And you can tell it's happening from the very before you finish the very first peach. If you can drop the amount of fuel used to digest your food, cut it in half, cut it by 75% or more, you can then take that fuel and put it elsewhere. A longer day of productivity, more intense physical actions, get more done in the day, just be generally more active, have more fun moving around, less couch potato, more enthusiast. So basically the math behind this is called uptake, transport, and delivery. And what scientists have researched and discovered is that the uptake from the digestive tract into the bloodstream, the transport through the bloodstream, and the delivery from the bloodstream to the cell of both oxygen and glucose is optimized, is improved on a low-fat raw vegan diet. The lower the fat in the diet, the better the uptake, transport, and delivery of oxygen and glucose. These are huge because you don't want the glucose to build up in your bloodstream. You want the glucose to get to the cells where it can fuel them. You don't want oxygen that can't get to your cells where you just feel like you're starving for oxygen. In low oxygen environments, this is where cancers thrive. So we want to have ideal uptake, transport, and delivery of oxygen and glucose. This is tremendously important. And finally, what's called bandwidth. You know, if a gecko loses its tail, it's a sad thing, but the gecko can grow another tail. For you, if you cut off the very tip, just the sliver of your finger, it'll take some time, but you can grow it back. But if you cut off your arm, you're not going to grow a new arm. But doctors and researchers have looked at this phenomenon many times. And what they've concluded is that actually we could grow a new arm. We're programmed to grow a new arm. We have everything it takes within us to grow a new arm. But we don't have the bandwidth, to borrow an expression from the computer industry. We don't have the bandwidth to keep our heart hearting and our kidneys kidding and our liver living. We don't have the bandwidth to keep doing all of the things that we have to do in our life to stay alive and grow a new arm. It's just too much of a drain. But that bandwidth increases dramatically on low-fat raw vegan, especially on low-fat. The low-fat aspect that improves uptake, transport, delivery, that improves sugar level optimization, that allows you to be more stable for more of the time, hence more productive, using more fuel from your food for life rather than to digest your food. This increase in bandwidth is absolutely maximized on low fat. And we have testimonials from people healing of, at this point, almost everything that you could name, lots of things you couldn't, loads of things where you go, no, there's no way that person could heal just by changing their diet. And we see it time and time and time again. People healing from what are thought of as incurable conditions. It's pretty much standard to heal from the basics. And this all comes about because of the increase in bandwidth made available for the body to heal itself, because it's not dealing with the emergencies of toxins coming in, of mutagens, carcinogens, teratogens, and on through that list. It's not dealing with anti-nutrients. It's not constantly trying to function with one hand tied behind its back, as it were, because it's getting the full complement of nutrients, the 500,000 different nutrients. Okay, well, maybe the triangle isn't really that important in the symphony, but man, every symphony has one. And at some point or another, that little guy who rings the triangle, he goes at least once and he rings the triangle. And it's part of the show. It's part of the music. It's part of what makes the complete symphony complete. Otherwise, it's incomplete. More protein, more vitamin A, that does not make up for less of the other nutrients that we need to have in the balance that we find them in whole, fresh, ripe, or organic, low-fat, raw vegan diet. This is my very, very basic introduction to the low-fat, raw vegan diet. I've created 12 more parts where I'll go into more detail. I've got parts where I'm going to deal with nutrition, 6 parts in nutrition, 6 parts on food. I'm sorry, 3 parts on food itself, and then 3 more parts on the culinary skills and the culinary arts necessary to have a raging, outrageous, raging success eating low-fat, raw vegan. But tonight I wanted to cover the basics, cover the rationale. Why vegan? Why raw? Why low fat? I've done something really different on this show tonight. This is the first time, other than when I wasn't making food myself, that I wasn't also manning the chat. But if people have questions or they'd like to talk a little bit, or they want to unmute and ask me a question, I'm open. We have time. Let's run with it.
Dr. Graham, thank you.
Let's start with Larissa. She gets first digs. Yes.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I think you got some benefits from this talk, and hopefully you clarify some of the internal questions that you had, or raise some questions that you can ask in the future and learn more information. Hopefully that will help you to make more conscious steps to changing your habits and considering living raw vegan lifestyle with us in 2021. I also would like to tell you that we are looking for people who would like to be in supportive environment of Let's Cook Raw, and with help of Dr. Graham and our chefs to really jump into raw vegan lifestyle full force, 100%. And we'll select about 5 people who will follow for a year, who will once a month share their experiences and their progress. And I think it will be inspirational for people who are watching and who people who are still on the fence to being 100% raw vegan. And we receive many emails, and we'll reply back with some next step for you and what we're looking for. And I think it will be very inspirational and very interesting process for everyone involved. So before we get questions, I would like to introduce our next show for the next Sunday. And we will have a raw vegan chef, Iris Zajac, and
Yes.
she's a woman of many trades, a raw vegan dessert chef, professional raw vegan dessert chef, health and business coach, and law student. And throughout her raw vegan cakes class, she shares the possibility of eating very healthy desserts with everyone. She teaches making beautiful desserts that you can enjoy to the fullest and without the guilt. So we'll be making raw vegan blueberry pie next Sunday. Please sign up for the class. Please get your ingredients. Please cook with us. I think just going through the process of cooking with the group, even if you don't do it perfect, I think it's a very different experience than watching the recorded show and do it on your own. So I invite you all, come next Sunday. We will be part of online Woodstock Fruit Festival. So we expect a lot of people. It will be very joyful and interesting show. And please make blueberry pie with us next Sunday. And at this point, please unmute your microphones and ask questions.
Okay, if I can, I'm gonna start out by answering a couple of things that I saw. I just read through the chat. Thank you everybody for being so active throughout that whole thing. First thing I want to mention is Karen Ramsey has given me, for the first time in my life, the technical word or the technical term for when you can't find the word that you are looking for. and it's called word finding difficulty. Thank you for that technical term. Now we've got the word finding difficulty to, I'm glad they didn't make that too complicated. AJ asked a great question, uh, but it was a really complicated one, and I could give you an hour, AJ, but I'm just going to give you a short one. Yes, animals will eat people food, no question. If you give them the option to eat something with concentrated flavor hits, if you give them the option to eat something that requires less effort in terms of chewing, if you give them the option to eat foods that are stimulating, in other words, they have all sorts of irritants, stimulants, condiments, wherever we want to go with that. Uh, things that things that light up different elements within the brain, um, and make you want more of that. They'll go for it, not to their health betterment, but they will go for it. You can fool children to eat candy rather than apples, uh, but it doesn't make it more nutritious. It doesn't make it healthier for us. It doesn't make it better for us in any way. It's just that we can fool the taste buds and we can fool the senses. Um, like the studies that have been done on rats, where they give them the option of having food. If they push one button, they can have food, or they can have cocaine if they push the other button. And they will push the cocaine pleasure center stimulant button over and over and over and over again until they die of starvation. Uh, we can fool the body, no question, but we're smarter than that, hopefully. And so the fact that we know that raw food is better for us should be enough to help us avoid self destructive behavior of eating cooked food. Now, Wrangham's book about catching fire completely ignored the anthropological research that is agreed upon throughout anthropology. Various people have written about this, um, but the anthropologist's most noted uh, description of what the heck happened, how did brain enlargement actually happen, was that the same as what happened to the white-tailed deer. In case you don't know, the white-tailed deer is an East Coast deer, fairly robust, large animal, not as big as a horse, but not way off, and um, famous for what's called the flourish, where they will jump into the air to show how strong they are. Like, don't mess with me, because I'm going to kick the heck out of you. Because they'll jump in the air, and while they're up there in the hang time, they'll do a couple of big kicks, and that's called a flourish. And they're just letting you know that they might not be a predator, but they're not really prey either, hopefully. And the white-tailed deer is a big deer. But when you go into environments where the food isn't particularly great, for instance, some white-tailed deer ended up stranded on islands south of the coast of Florida. And on those islands, the food is it's known in biology as a marginal environment. And over the centuries, those white-tailed deer, which still test genetically as white-tailed deer, they're not a separate species, those white-tailed deer got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until now they're smaller than a Great Dane dog. They're about the size of a German Shepherd. They're not big deer. They're wild to see deer, full blown white-tailed deer that don't come up much past your knees. In the same way as the Incas, who were not even 75% the size of people today. An average Incan man was about 4'9" and had a foot size that would be like a size 5 shoe, which explains why their doorways were only 5 feet tall. The doorways of their houses and their buildings were only 5 feet high, and the steps were only 6 inches wide. I mean, an American walking on those steps, you have to turn sideways and put your feet on the steps sideways. But they could just walk up and down, no problem, because their feet were much smaller. It's been shown time and time again that when we improve nutrition, people grow. When we improve the calorie availability, various parts of our development that have been held back can finally become unleashed. And the anthropologists have told us, from Richard Leakey on through all the others, and now a bunch of biologists have jumped on that bandwagon as well, saying that human beings, when we first came onto the scene, the most readily available food for us was leaves. Leaves are everywhere in the jungle. They're just everywhere. And leaves were readily available, and we ate leaves. And sometimes a little bit of fruit. But the caloric density of fruit is anywhere from 4 to 10 times that of leaves. And what the anthropologists all say, and I trust them as scientists far more than I trust one author writing one book, although everybody loved to catch on to what he said. The anthropologists say that when human beings found denser caloric sources, so they started eating fruit instead of eating leaves, that this gave them sufficient calories to support their potential for brain development. That the potential had always been there, but it just couldn't happen because there weren't enough calories to fuel that development. I'm going to go with them. I'm going to go with the professionals, and the professionals say fuel availability, as we went to denser calorie sources, allowed us to reach the potential that we always had. It doesn't create a situation where we just get bigger brains and bigger brains and bigger brains beyond our potential, even though we're now eating even denser, refined calorie sources. It's not making us smarter, even though we went from eating a tiny, tiny bit of cooked food in along with our entirely 100% raw food diet to a point where now many people almost eat no raw food at all in the course of their year. I'm not seeing that making them even smarter. And I think that whole concept of eating cooked food made us human, eating cooked food made us smarter, none of that holds any water. Sorry. At least that's my view. Other questions?
Hi, Doug. I have a question. How's it going?
Hi, who's talking?
My name's Melissa. I signed up for your. Hi, I signed up for your quick start class on the 1st when you had the class.
Oh, fantastic.
For succeeding on raw. Super excited for that. I just had a quick question. I know that you mentioned that, about 30% of the energy in food is lost and used to digest the cooked food itself. I eat about 80
to physiologists.
I'm sorry?
So say the physiologists.
Yes, so say the physiologist. I eat about 80 to 90% raw and then 20 to 10% cooked. So in the case of like me eating a huge, huge raw kale salad and then maybe like 1 or 2 baked falafels, in this case, the amount of energy that it would take for me to break down those cooked falafels, it would take away from the kale salad.
A little bit.
Okay, a little bit. And then, but the
Mhm.
kale would also help with the digestion of the falafel, because I've noticed that if I were to just eat the falafel alone, like I would die in pain.
Right. Eating lots of fiber, eating lots of green.
Yeah.
There's nothing really magic about green, because the green itself is a product of chlorophyll in foods, and chlorophyll itself is not a nutrient for human beings. You can open up any nutrition book and it will never list chlorophyll as a nutrient. No matter what you've been taught, folks, chlorophyll is not a nutrient. But the things that are green tend to have a whole bunch of other things in them that are really good for us, and counter effect even the falafels.
That's awesome. It's a good thing I never bought chlorophyll pills or chlorophyll
Exactly.
supplements. Thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure.
Hi, Doug. My name is Kathy. I'm here in South Florida. And I was
Hi,
just
Kath.
wondering, do you have a specific type of water you would recommend our drinking?
Well, it's a great question. And where in South Florida are you?
Fort Lauderdale area.
Oh, yeah, okay. They don't have the best water in Fort Lauderdale,
No,
to be honest. So I wouldn't recommend drinking out of the tap.
I can't do that. I'm well water. I don't even want to rinse my mouth out with that.
Yeah, as my good friend Wayne Pickering says, never drink the crap from the tap. But it's an interesting question, because some people want different things out of their water than what I want out of my water. When I'm thirsty, I want water because I want to rehydrate my body. I want to add water to my nutrient load and my toxic load, whatever each of those may be that makes up me. I want to add water so that I can function properly without being dehydrated.
Right.
I don't want to add minerals. I'm not looking to add electrolytes or something. I'm just looking for water. So I really want the purest water I can possibly find. Pure water comes from 3 sources that I know about. One is if you distill your water. 2 is if you use reverse osmosis for your water. And the third is what's called condensated water. You know how water drips off of a air conditioner or forms on the outside
Yeah.
of a glass? Well, there are actually machines that intentionally condense water out of the air. And then you
Oh,
can get condensated water. And I really like condensated water. I've had it when I was out in California one time. It was great water, just really great water. The machine was very expensive, but those are the 3 I know about that make really great water.
thank you.
But the question is loaded a little bit, because as you consume more and more water in your water-rich, whole, fresh, ripe, organic plant diet,
Hmm.
what most people find is their actual need for water goes down dramatically. And so when I was living a standard Western diet, being an athlete, consuming 2 gallons of water a day, 700 gallons of water a year, the kind of water I drank really mattered.
Right.
Now, in the course of a year, I'd be surprised to find out that I drink a gallon of water. And for a gallon of water, you could drink practically anything. It wouldn't matter because it won't add up into a big problem. It would be like smoking 1 cigarette a year, which you pretty much do if you live in a city anyway. And or getting on a couple of airline flights. I mean, you have to pick and choose which battles you want to pick and choose. That all said, nonetheless, I distill the water in our house, and I'm really glad I do, because The amount of crap that is left behind is simply astonishing. I get enough minerals from every gallon of water to pretty much make maybe like a robin's egg worth of minerals. It's a lot of minerals left behind, and those minerals contribute to your arthritides, to your hardening of the arteries, to your Alzheimer's, to your kidney and bile stones or gallstones. Um, those extra minerals have to go somewhere, and personally, I don't want any of those problems. So I'm perfectly happy. The little bit of water we do use, I'm going to use distilled water. Is my choice. People argue against it. They say, no, 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 you don't get any minerals. And I'm going, I don't need minerals from water. I'm trying to hydrate. The minerals require water in order to dilute them down to acceptable levels. Why would I want to add minerals in? I just want water. That's the story.
Thank you.
Sure, you're very
I have a
welcome.
question, Doug.
Yes.
Okay. Earlier you mentioned something about when we heat our food, it damages, deranges, destroys. Then you mentioned something about warming it with our finger in the pot, which leads me to dehydrating at temperatures of 115 and below, still keeping the enzymes intact. Is that still also part of?
Think of the, finish your question. I don't want to cut you off. Is that part of
Okay.
it?
Okay, so is that still deranging anything in the food?
So think of the temperatures that we commonly see on Earth. Okay,
Right.
if you go to Death Valley, there's still plants living in Death Valley. You might not live a long time there, but plants live there. There's plants that make it, and it's 125 degrees.
Oh, okay.
Right? I've been in Texas. I was in Texas one day out jogging because I didn't know that it was 126 degrees when I was out jogging, and it almost killed me. It really, I mean, I drank a gallon of water when I got back, and I didn't pee for 4 hours. I mean, it was just a mess. But I drank a gallon of water and then ate an entire watermelon and still didn't pee for 4 hours. I mean, I was really, after 1 hour of running in that kind of heat, I didn't know it was that hot or I wouldn't have gone out. The next day I went out in 114 in Dallas, and it felt like a cool day compared to 126. But either way, even at the 126, there was still trees and grass, and everything was growing just fine. This whole business about enzymes, I don't want to say it's overplayed, because, I mean, there's reasons to go raw, but the damage, okay. Have you heard of pasteurization?
Yes.
Okay. Pasteurization relies upon damaging, deranging, and destroying certain enzymatic activities so that microbes and insects and whatever else is there in your food won't adversely affect you.
Right.
Okay. Pasteurization happens at 161 degrees.
Ouch.
Okay, that's hot. That's really hot. In fact, if water that's 150 degrees splashes on you, it will scald you. If you've ever gotten into a hot tub that had a thermometer going, you know that a hot tub at 110 is hard to stay in for more than a very short time.
Yes.
106 and you're like, wow, this is phenomenal. 110 and you go, I got to get out of here pretty quickly. 150, 120 and your skin will burn after 2 minutes.
Okay.
130, it takes about 30 seconds. 140, it takes, I believe, 5 seconds for for water 140 degrees to cause a burn. And then at 150, it's instantaneous burn. So, but there's all kinds of nuance to that whole concept, because just like us, food sweats, and the sweating process keeps the food itself cool as the water that's sweating out of the food evaporates.
Oh, that makes sense.
So if you put a bunch of tomatoes in a dehydrator, say you slice some tomatoes, it's the height of summer, you got like all, you're drowning in tomatoes. So you're going to dry some, and you put them in the dehydrator at 112 or 114 because you don't want to damage any of it. Before they ever get dry enough to continue the drying process, they're going to go moldy because it's hot, warm, and wet in there.
Ah,
This
okay.
isn't, you weren't trying to grow mold, but you will. You've got sugars, hot, warm, wet. You're going to grow mold. And you'll see anybody ever seen the white growing on their dehydrated tomatoes? This isn't good. So if I'm going to dry tomatoes or a variety of other things that might go in a dehydrator intentionally, I don't have any qualms about boosting that temperature to 130, 135 for the first hour while it's sweating off the most water.
Now that makes
And then turn
perfect
it back
sense.
down to 120, 118, 100 and something reasonable, because that's more than enough to do the job. I've got an unlimited amount of time. So, I can do it at low temperature and long time. Be gentle about the whole thing. Does that help?
Thank you. That you put that into perfect explanation for me.
Oh, bless your heart. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And Dr. Graham, that was a very informational session. I hope everyone benefited from that as much as I am. And I know a lot, and I work a lot with Dr. Graham. So there was still interesting new points that I learned today and clarified for myself. So I hope you felt the same way. And we're looking forward to see you next Sunday.
And like we said, we're going to do a 12-part show. If you're interested in the 12-part show, there's going to be information on the website. You can sign up for all 12 parts right there. Thanks again.